But let's move on to Guinea Bissau, because the country's electoral commission says it won't be able to publish the results of the elections because armed men wearing balaclavas had destroyed ballots and tally sheets during the coup last week. The military seized power before the outcome of the vote was announced. Civil society groups and the opposition have accused the deposed President Umaru Sissoco Embalo of orchestrating the coup. Meanwhile, Nigeria has offered Guinea-Bissau's opposition presidential candidate, Fernando Diaz, protection at its embassy in the capital, Bissau, following a military coup. Mr. Diaz had been under protection of the Nigerian embassy after threats made against him, according to Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Yusuf Tuga. The offer came as leaders from the Economic Community of West African States, the regional bloc, led by Sierra Leone President Julius Maada Bio, tried to persuade the military officers who seized power last week to stand down. Mr. Diaz was the main challenger to President Umaru Sissoco Embalo, who was seeking a second term, but has since left the country following that military takeover. Both President Embalo and Mr. Diaz have claimed victory in the election, which took place late in November. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by Professor Tunde Esan, who is a professor of international relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent. And if there is one man who can figure out what is going on in Guinea-Bissau, apart from maybe the deposed president himself, it would have to be you. I mean, good to see you, Prof.
Good to see you, Charles.
Nigeria offers protection to the opposition leader in Guinea-Bissau, and then the Electoral Commission says, we can't finalize the results because somebody's come and nicked it all or wrecked it all. And I mean, that is coming, you know, following a military coup, which we don't know for sure was actually a military coup. I mean, it's just so confusing. What do you make of it all?
Let me say this. It is a military coup. Whichever way you look at it, either contrived, conspiratorial, or otherwise, it is a military coup.
Because the military have taken over.
Because what we have now is a general in charge of Guinea-Bissau, a country with a checkered history. Whichever way one looks at it, they have a long history of insurrection, military insurrection, violence, takeover, and all that. So it is not surprising what we are witnessing. For new students of international relations, of the younger generations, they might not know much about Guinea-Bissau. It's a small country wedged between Senegal and Guinea on the coast of West African coast, sub-region. So, but one thing is sure, it is an interesting development, but with an historical antecedent.
Indeed. And of course, you're somebody who looks at all the developments across the continent as democratic developments and elections and so on. Does it look to you like military coups, which for a long time were seen as no longer fashionable in Africa, are making some kind of a comeback, certainly in the sub-region?
The announcement of General Naman as the head of state and the commander-in-chief in Guinea-Bissau on November 26th, it's a very, very, sobering moment. I mean, sobering development for most of us, because what we are witnessing is a revert back to the last event that we witnessed, last set of events that we witnessed in the 70s and 80s in Africa. At the last count, Burkina Faso is under military rule, Mali is under military rule, Niger is under military rule, Guinea is under military rule, and now we have Guinea-Bissau all in West Africa, not to talk of Sudan in North Africa, and of course Madagascar. So it is not a very, very, very cheering news to have that.
It definitely is
in West Africa. Particularly when you look at it, West Africa has about 6.14 million square kilometers of land. And as at the last count, when I was doing the calculation, about 3.6 million out of that million square kilometers are effectively under the military rule. When you look at Niger and Mali,
so basically half of it.
Basically, in terms of land,
Yeah.
area, you are talking about square kilometers. You are talking about half of the entire West Africa. It's not cheering news. It's not a cheering news at all.
But why is this happening? Because clearly, increasingly, some of these countries feel that the best way to hand over power is not through the ballot box.
But we in Africa, definitely, the culture, the tradition is not as deep as we had thought it is. We have been thinking about that. We say, okay, we have a tradition of maybe civilian, rule, and that nothing can change it. But let's not forget there are historical backgrounds to some of these things. Low economic development in a situation where in the 21st century, you still have nations with less than $1,000, dollars per capita, when you look at it, income. It's by population. So when you look at these things, and there's nowhere in the world, when you look at the history of Europe, when it gets to that point, there are always insurrections. That we are witnessing in terms of military insurrection is not surprising, because that's where the tradition comes from in Africa.
And is there a sense that the regional bloc, ECOWAS, and the continental bloc, the African Union, lack the political will to discourage coups across Africa? Because beyond just verbally condemning and suspending them, from the blocs.
It should go beyond condemning. They should take proactive and, very definite steps, when it comes to reactions to this. But unfortunately, most, if not all, almost all the countries in West Africa, they are very weak economically. And apart from few ones, there are few ones who are doing relatively well. Ghana is one of them, and of course Cape Verde is there. Senegal is doing its best. Of course, Nigeria is coming up, but definitely not in the class of the 80s and 90s of Africa that we know.
And when you say countries are doing well, what is your reference point?
What I mean,
is it in terms of the quality of the leadership?
What I mean by the quality, that relatively doing well, there's a language there's something I said that I said relatively doing it. In other words, when you compare it to other African countries, for example, you might discover that maybe when it comes to economy of some of these countries, it's still very low. For example, Nigeria, we're talking about $250 billion GDP for a nation of 200 million people, counting. That is not, it's something else. And, and of course, this small nation, Guinea Bissau, susceptible to insurrections, violent takeover of governments and all that.
Well, they've had 15 coups.
15 coups since 1973. And what is even much more disappointing and, sobering, and of course, cause for deep reflection was that Amilcar Cabral was one of the leading figures when it comes to, African fighting for African independence. African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde was formed in 1956, and Amilcar Cabral was in the trenches for almost 20-something years. Unfortunately, for almost 20 years. Unfortunately, this is happening in Africa, in his country, and in his own country. So it's quite unfortunate.
Yes, it's amazing. It really is interesting when you hearken back to those days of so much hope. The 60s, the 70s, when, in fact, there was a time when they were talking about Guinea, Ghana, Mali uniting into one country. There was a lot of Pan-Africanist thought at that time with Kwame Nkrumah and all the rest of it.
I remember very well in the late 80s, in the political science class, when it comes to international relations, there are projections by leading scholars of international relations that saying that, look, by year 2000, Republic of Benin wouldn't have a choice than to be part of Nigeria, because the growth will have been so phenomenal that, it will have been a thing of pride. Yeah. You understand?
To join Nigeria, assuming Nigeria wants it to join. But just returning to Guinea-Bissau and the reality on the ground now, what do we know about the military leadership, the new military leadership. The man who was sworn in was the chief of staff until he was sworn in as the new military leader.
Like you rightly said, he was the chief of army staff. So in other words, there's a lot. You know, he was the one in charge of the defense of the entire country, whichever way you look at it, and he was controlling thousands of troops, you know, and he has been part of the system for a fairly long time. Don't forget that.
But an ally of President Embalo. An
ally, of course. You should be loyal to your commander-in-chief. There has been so many conspiracy theories that maybe Sissoko and Embalo actually connive with him, but when you look at the history of Guinea-Bissau, it's difficult to justify that, because with little insurrections, disagreement, military has always been the last and the first option.
Yeah, but on the other hand, when you analyze the tea leaves around it, I mean, it just seems very unusual that first of all, it was Embalo himself who announced the coup. And secondly, that he toddled into an aircraft and was allowed to leave. I mean, the tradition is that if they take over, they lock you up. You know what I mean? They don't let you get into a plane and take off and then go and do whatever you want to do.
This way, you can use the word to say, look, sometimes it's like that, whether you like it or not. Don't forget the case in Madagascar, where the man, you know, they took over, and the president had to leave, and he flew. So it is possible. It is possible. And like I said, we should not forget that Embalo, 53 years, has been part of the government for a long time. In fact, he was the prime minister under Fernando Diaz. You understand? I mean, under Jose Diaz, the man that he took over from, the man that, the last president. Not,
because Fernando Diaz is the opposition leader.
He's the opposition leader. Yeah. Fernando Diaz is the opposition. The last president that was there before him, he was prime minister under him. You understand? So what it means basically is that he has an experience. He knows a little bit about the history of the country, and he knows that many of the former head of state ended up, in the mortuary few days after insurrection.
So it was a good idea to do it this way.
It wouldn't have been totally lost on him, the implications of staying there. That is one part of it, which I think could be true.
So based on your considerable knowledge of these developments across Africa in general and West Africa in particular, what do you think comes next for Guinea-Bissau?
What comes next for Guinea-Bissau is for Africans, not just ECOWAS. ECOWAS, there is a challenge in ECOWAS. Remember, 3 nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have formed what they call Confederation of Sahel States, which means that effectively, you understand, we might not like to accept it, that ECOWAS is divided. So what it means basically, the AU has to step in. That's the truth. The president of Angola should see this as a case study. You understand? See what they can do to ensure a smooth and short transition program in Guinea-Bissau.
Indeed. Prof, thank you very much indeed. Professor Tunde Esan is a professor of international relations with a focus on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles.
We appreciate it very much.